When I started writing, I had no idea how many mistakes I was making. I spent years stuck in the same frustrating cycle, writing drafts that went nowhere, wasting time on ideas that didn't work, which I should have abandoned earlier, and that led to me doubting whether I'd ever figure out this becoming a writer thing or not. After a decade of writing and earning a master's degree in creative writing, I've learned a lot. But there are a few things that I wish I've known earlier. Hi friends, my name is Mohammed and I'm a writer, and on this channel we build writing and reading habits to make the most out of our time and better understand the world, especially for busy people. So in this video, I'm sharing the writing advice that could have saved me a lot of time, years of struggle, and hopefully it will help you with avoiding those mistakes and becoming a better writer. The first one is writing is a learned skill, not a talent you're born with. When I decided that I wanted to become a writer, I would listen to podcasts, read interviews on the Paris Review of writers telling the interviewer and the reader that they started writing or they wanted to become a writer since they were 6. They wrote their first story when they became 8 and they published when they were 15. A little bit of an exaggeration, but this is how it felt. And you have to understand, as someone who learned English or started to learn English after I moved to the United States from Yemen, I was already 13 or 14. That felt like I've already missed the boat. It felt like when one of my friends shared with me that he wanted to be a professional soccer player, but he was already 25, he had a knee injury, and it was too late for him because, you know, professional soccer players in their 20s, that's like their prime, and they start to decline in their mid-30s. So soccer has an age limit, but writing doesn't. I remember what in college the biggest obstacle for me, it wasn't even the storytelling because I wasn't even worried about that yet. I would learn storytelling, craft things later on, but I would just get frustrated over grammar. Like I would put the comma where it doesn't belong. I would use, just the verbiage, because Arabic and English are very different, structurally different languages. So my Arabic would seep into my English, and it was just a mess. And professors would make it very clear to me that my writing was a mess. I remember this one professor who I shared with him that I wanted to become a writer, and he literally said that if you wanted to become a writer, you can't make these rookie mistakes. And so he sent me to the writing center, which are people that can help you edit and proofread your writing. And it was demoralizing. All these experiences felt like they were signs for me to change what I wanted to become. And then I graduated from college and I applied to a very competitive writing program, or an MFA. And their acceptance rate was less than 2%. They would get 500 applications and only take 6 students per semester, and I was one of those 6. That year that I applied was the only program that I applied to. It was the first time that I applied ever to an MFA program, and I got it. And it was the most validating step towards becoming a writer, because it told me that these people behind those screens or behind those applications read my work, because the writing sample was the most important piece of the application, and found it that there is potential in this writing to become better. So all the experiences that I had experienced about how bad my writing was during college, I just forgot it and just moved on. And now I'm a better writer, and I can tell you that the most important thing about writing, it's also grammar, commas, and all of these things, they do matter. But if you can tell a story, if you are passionate about just sitting on the desk and writing, and if you have the stamina to go through your work over and over again, then you will become a better writer. It's just by definition. The second advice I wish I'd followed was write stories that embarrasses you, or be vulnerable. In the beginning, I used to write stories that are of these perfect Muslim characters who did not smoke and did not curse and treated their parents well and went to the mosque every single day, and they were just perfect, ideal, horrible stories. But those stories are, first, not real, second, are not relatable. Readers or people do not want to read about someone that is non-existent or that's just ideal. All of us are full of flaws and mistakes, and we disappoint ourselves constantly, and we strive to that ideal. But then at the same time, if we just read about a character that doesn't make mistakes, that are perfect in every realm they engage in, then it becomes very boring to read. Then one day I decided to write this story about this young character who was in love with British colonialism. Yemen, as some of you might know, was colonized colonized by Britain, South Yemen at the very least. And this character was just in love with the British uniform, with the British rifle, and he just wanted to be one of them. And in order for me to write this character, I was forced to write someone that I disagreed with from beginning to end. But then that story taught me is how to write a character that is believable, that has a transformation, that has a mission, regardless whether I agree with it or not, and to look at it from an outsider view while I am the author who writes it. I can't remember who said this quote, but there is someone said that when writing happens successfully, it feels like walking outside naked. And not literally, but when you show the most vulnerable parts of your life is when you are able to connect with the reader at the emotional level. The third advice is carve time for your writing, because you will never find time to write. We keep procrastinating and telling ourselves that once I finish this semester, or once I graduate, once I get a job, or once I move on from this time that I'm experiencing, I will find time to write and I will write more. It doesn't happen. Life does not get less busy. Life does not get better. Life does not give you the opportunity to sit down and do the thing that you want to do. You have to carve the time and do it. When I look back at times when I used to think that I was super busy during college, when I held a full-time job and I was going full-time in school, I used to think there's no way life can get busier than that. But it does. It does when you are getting a master's degree in creative writing full-time, when you are working full-time, and when you are a parent full-time. It gets busier. Yes, there are moments in life where it gets less busy and you have more time on your plate, things are going well from every direction, but then there is a value about carving the time to write every single day, or as many days as possible, so that it becomes a habit, whether it's working or not, and you hold yourself accountable for it and learn from those projects. And I learned this lesson now when I was not busy. I learned this lesson when I was at the busiest time of my life during my MFA program. Well, I became a father and I was working full time. And because I was held accountable by my peers to submit feedback for their writing, to submit 2 stories a semester for workshop, I found the time to write no matter what. I used to write early in the morning at 6 o'clock before anybody would wake up. And then, or I don't find the opportunity to write early morning, after everyone goes to sleep, I will stay awake and write for half an hour or an hour, because I know at the end of that week or at the end of the following week, I have to submit something for people to read. And I used to say, if I don't write in the morning, I can't write any time of the day. And it was just a belief. And if I didn't write in the morning, even if I had time in the afternoon or at night, I would just not have the juice or energy to write. And so that was the belief. But then I learned that it's not about sticking to a particular schedule. Every day for me is not the same exact sort of structured day. Sometimes I have meetings in the morning, sometimes I have meetings in the afternoon, sometimes I have a very busy day at work, and sometimes I'm off from work. So it's about finding that pocket of time that you can expect yourself to sit down and write and not be distracted, and protect it at every cost. And what I do, I have a set time. During lunch hour, I would sit down and write for half an hour, and then I take a half hour lunch. But then if that doesn't happen, then on my calendar, I would move it into the later afternoon or after I finish work. And I will write no matter what. And sometimes I don't write, but I will sit down regardless. Now, there is value in talking about where you have the most energy to actually write. So for a lot of people, they can get the hardest task in the morning. So, before you go to work, or even while you are in transportation, before you start your day, whatever the case might be. But I've learned that flexibility is the key to getting that writing session done. The other thing that I've noticed that if I write right after having lunch, I will have just that food coma and I'm just less creative. So I will push my lunch even though if I'm hungry, and for half an hour, 45 minutes, and write right before lunch. And this is just a caveat. I don't know if it works for everybody, but it definitely works for me. Fourth advice is every failed story, or every story that fails, is an investment for your success, or for the successful stories later on. And I don't want to turn this into a TED talk of like failure is part of success, but I think what happened to me is I used to write not even stories. They were not stories. They were just an attempt to writing a story, because I did not know what stories are mentally. I don't know how they're structured. I didn't know what pace and rhythm was. And even though right now I don't have definition to these terms, but I have an intuition for them. And that didn't come from reading a craft book. Although a craft book gives you words for the experience of writing, but those lessons, you do not learn them by attending a class or reading a book. They actually get learned by applying them, by writing writing and writing some more. In a sense, writing stories that don't work is the price that you pay to learn the lessons that will allow you to write stories that are good and later on very good, and the more you write, then you will become a great writer. After years of writing short stories, I want to transition to novels, and so far I've attempted 2 novels. I've written 70 pages for one of them, the other one has 30 pages, and they're not working. And I know I can write until the end and move on and then edit a second draft and rewrite it. What I'm learning about writing longer work is that I got too comfortable, too used to saying things faster, shorter pace, releasing information as fast as possible, explaining characters as soon as they show up. And for novels, they have just longer breath. I can just take my time around describing what the weather is like, describing how this character feels, and sort of like sprinkle all these elements throughout the story, as opposed to when it comes to a short story, you're trying to release as much information as possible so that you can get to the climax and then the transformation. And that lesson doesn't come from pondering it or reading about it, even though I already heard it before, but it comes from attempting it and seeing how it plays out in your own writing. The 5th advice I didn't follow sooner, although it was the obvious one, is write what you know. If you're like me, in the beginning, most likely you fell in love with books first, with reading first, and after having favorite authors or favorite books, you began to think that maybe I can write stories like these or novels like these. And your first attempt is writing in the same style, topics of the books that you admire the most. But in reality, if you write what you know about where you come from, the culture that you are a part of, or the ethnicity that you were born into, or the country that you are familiar with, or whatever the case might be, first, writing will be easier, you will enjoy it more, and people, even though they are outside your circle of relatability, will also relate to you because you're able to paint a vivid story with real emotions, with authenticity, and they will feel related to you whether they are part of your social group or not. A year ago, I published a story called Home is a Holiday, and is in Phoebe magazine, and is about this character who gets to the JFK airport for the first time after winning a visa lottery, and his experience of being in America for the very first time as a Arab American, as a Muslim American, not even American, but as a Muslim or Arab. And he just goes through the nightmare that many of us go through when we meet with TSA agents that wants to make your life hell. And recently I received a message from a British woman, a white British woman, telling me how she felt so connected with the character that I wrote. Even though she is not from Yemen, she's white, she's British, the story was in America, there was nothing that overlaps with the story elements and her as a person. Still, she felt related to the struggle that this character went through because he did not understand the language being spoken, and his attempt to explaining or communicating something that was sort of trapped in his head and he cannot communicate it. And I don't want to give out the story if he wants to read it, but the point that I'm trying to make is this British woman has nothing to do with the story or its elements, and it still feels related to the story because the story was written in a way where it's authentic. It's something that I know I've experienced, and so greater people will relate to it. Advice number 6 is writing is rewriting, and I learned this from George Saunders, which he says that the sooner you fall in love with editing, the better your stories and the better writer you will become. I used to hate editing because when you write the first draft, there's this like a wave of emotions and wave of images, and they're not predictable. You are discovering the story as you are writing, and it's just exciting. But when you're editing, you're going through lines that you used to appreciate, now you hate, and the story doesn't make sense anymore, and it's like just frustrating. But the more I wrote, the more I felt doubt that I can be a writer, because my first drafts were always horrible. But then falling in love with editing, it just liberated me from thinking the first draft is the draft that I'm gonna show anybody or everybody. Now I write the first draft with the knowledge that I know no one will ever read this, and they will read the polished version, which will happen in the rewrite. And in the rewrite is when the story will actually truly emerge. It's almost like it's trying to climb a mountain, and it's very rocky, it's full of trees, and you have no map. And the first time you do it, you get lost, and maybe you sleep in the wild. But at the end of the day, you get to the top. But the second time you make that same climb, you've already learned something about this climb. You learned something about this mountain. lesson, you made some marks hopefully on the way for you to do it again better, faster, using less energy. And third, fourth, and fifth time, it just gets easier and easier with time. Advice number 7. And this, after I learned it, I actually formed a quote for it. Writing is a solitary act, but when done in a group, it then becomes a communal ritual. There is nothing that will improve your writing, or at least there is nothing that improved my writing better than having a writing group. Because what a writing group does is that it does two things. They show you what you are very, very good at, which for most of the time you will take for granted and will not see, and so that you can continue to hone. And two, they will show you your blind spots, your weaknesses, which you can work on. Now, what a writing group also does is that you will get to read other people's work in a way that you do not read novels or short stories for fun. You are reading them closely, you are giving them feedback, and it forces you to learn how to read like a writer, not read for entertainment. And that also gives you two advantages. One is that you're reading other people's work and you are learning what they are good at so that you can steal them. And two, like I said earlier, it teaches you how to read like a writer. Advice number 8 is invest in your passion early. When I decided to become a writer, I just wrote. I did not show it to anybody. I did not take courses. I didn't do anything with my writing. I mean, I did submit it to the New Yorker, and I thought I was offended why they didn't accept my stories. Otherwise, I waited for 2 or 3 years after I graduated from college until I applied for an MFA program. Luckily, I was accepted, and there I learned that a lot of people in my MFA program had taken writing workshops, literature classes before the program, so they had the advantage of knowing what the structure of the program was like. I had to go through a learning curve of how this workshop works. I didn't know how to give people feedback on their stories. I did not know how to submit. I never submitted a story for a group of people for them to give me feedback. And once I received that feedback, I had to go through an emotional battle about the horrible things that I, heard about my story, because that was the first time I ever done or been in a workshop. But you can do that much earlier than you take in an MFA program. And if you decide not to go the MFA route, whether it's because of time, money, or whatever the case might be, then courses are the perfect place. You there will meet people, you will be in workshop, you can take literature classes, you can take craft classes, and you will learn the same things that you will learn in an MFA at a cheaper price. And some of them are online, you don't even have to attend. There you go. These are about 8 writing advices that I wish I should have known sooner. They would have saved me so much frustration and time that now would probably, or hopefully, will save you frustration and time that I went through. If you're a writer, I would love to know what writing advice you wish you've known sooner. Write that in the comments, and if you've enjoyed this video, then you will surely enjoy my video on a book that's not only a craft book, it's more like a writing course that will teach you about storytelling, that will give you timeless advice about stories, and it is by the great George Saunders here. And in the meantime, thank you for watching and keep writing.